Hi, I'm Steve Carlson, and today I want to lay out my positive, constructive positions on jobs and the economy. I'm an independent, always have been, and today the 41% of Minnesota voters who are independent still have the Minnesota Independence primary. And if you maintain this gift with your careful vote for the Independence Party, we'll keep the Independence Party alive. And I hope this little presentation will motivate you to vote in the Independence Party primary on August 12th for me, for U.S. Senator from Minnesota, and keep the dream of a vehicle for Minnesota independent voters alive on Independence Day in Minnesota, August 12th. I'd like to begin this video presentation on the economy and jobs by making 2 points first of all. A good economy does not mean a money machine. And a job does not mean a money machine. A man is not a money machine, and a woman is not a money machine. Instead, we are all connected in the common good, which we call society or civilization. Too often, players in this debate are just looking for a money machine, and the economy serves a much larger purpose, to connect the entire society in the exchange of things that they need to buy, called goods, and also providing services. But it's not a money machine because it's always a two-way transaction. So if you're making money, you should be giving value for what you're getting the money for. Too often, people are just trying to hoard money. Or too often, people are just trying to get money without giving work in return. And as political leaders, we want to make good economic policy. We are not there to act as someone's proxy in a negotiation with the union or with the business owners or so-called wars on women or whatever. Now, the Democrats and Obama have a lot of ideas about why the economic recovery isn't as successful as it needs to be. Number one, of course, no surprise, is the Republicans. And Al Franken would say, the lying liars. Just a joke, I guess. But seriously, it isn't so simple as just the Republicans, and here's why. If this is about economics, then you would expect the Republicans to represent their economic interests. If they didn't, the economy itself would not work. All of us need our seat at the table. And if we're not represented, again, the economy won't work. If we can't get that seat through our representatives, then our economy won't work. That puts a big expectation on our representatives, doesn't it? Senators, representatives, governors, etc., parties. I haven't heard economics discussed seriously by the Independence Party since Tom Horner was debating Mark Dayton and Tom Emmer. And I would say on the press as well. They are not living up to that, nor is our court system. Still, it begins with each one of us. Let's not pass the buck, unless it's a real buck. So who's representing your interests? And what are your interests anyway? Do you know how to go about finding out what your interests are? Will you ask your union boss, your CEO or supervisor, the Minnesota Independence Party employees, the DFL, or GOP? Well, it comes down to how much do we want the city, county, state, and federal governments to make policy decisions? And how much do we want to give free Americans? All Americans under our federal and state constitutions have some property, and often it's held in a family, and that property is an important part of their freedom. Well, in order to create jobs, we need employers, and we need investors, and people need to invest the money they own in order to create goods and services which they hope consumers will buy, pay them enough that they do not lose their money, and in fact, if they're successful, they will actually profit from that. They'll get earnings. And that is really the essence of what the economy is. So you're involved in that economy. We're all involved in that economy. And to the degree that we have the government shut it down, take it over, and we hope to benefit from that, we're actually hurting our economy. So that's why I'm saying in my song, with the free market system, our nation was great. We have to act because it's slipping before it's too late. Let's give our business economy a chance. You know they'll pull their weight. And that doesn't mean laissez-faire. That doesn't mean just let anybody do whatever they want to, and it doesn't mean no regulation. What it means is we don't want our government control to overcome the very basic purpose that our economy is supposed to provide in the first place. So what I want is equal opportunity. That means people have a reasonable, reasonably equal opportunity to participate in all these various aspects of the economy, to own a business, to work for or manage a business, meaning not just to get the money for the job, but to actually perform and make that business successful. And this has been very difficult, and so we are getting into all these various issues. One of these issues is the minimum wage. The fact that we're creating minimum wage laws shows that our inflated economy, the market, doesn't support this level of wage for entry-level employees. The fact that the minimum wage isn't supported shows, when economists look at this, they see that given other resources available to a business employer, that they can fill that position and pay a lower wage. With minimum wage, we try to force them to pay more, but you'll find we can't force them. This is a free country. They can use technology. They can change the business to mix in less workers, less of a labor component. For instance, now there are restaurants that allow you to order by computer. They're in airports and big cities, so they can get the best food and cut their wait staff, the part that tips. This increases in areas where political activists jack up the minimum wage, raise it to artificially high and state-determined levels. There are people out there that will work for a lower wage. Now, if businesses don't get qualified employees, then they're not going to be successful in business, and they'll either go out of business or they'll lose a lot of money. So what the minimum wage laws do is boost the cost of labor for businesses, and this in turn affects their business opportunity. They cannot continue to produce as much product if they have to pay more to the employees. And yet I'm not one who says there should be no minimum wage. And again, everyone's got a part in the economy. Not just the business owners or investors, not just the employees, but all citizens, the public. So even though the property is private, it's invested in a public business enterprise, which affects all of us. And so minimum wage as government policy needs to reflect good public policy that reflects the interests of the entire public. And we should ask businesses to come to the table on this and to give their point of view. And they have. And what they're telling us is that establishing strong minimum wage levels on a political basis, as the DFL has done, is going to have an impact on not just the businesses themselves, but it's going to have an impact on the whole public. It's going to have an impact on the whole economy. And what they say is that jobs will be lost. There'll be less of a variety of goods and services available, or different ways to participate in the economy. And what we don't want is for someone to impose a federal minimum wage law that's going to cut off the supply in goods of services in places that can't support that wage, like Minnesota or parts of Minnesota. We don't want Washington telling us that we have to pay $10.50 an hour just because some politician thinks people are going to vote for them because they think that made them middle class because they got $10.50. And we all know that $10.50 isn't enough to be in the middle class, okay? And so what they really want is something like 20 or more, because they want all kinds of mandatory health benefits that are decided on the basis of politics and all that. And it's not going to hurt them, it's going to hurt us in Minnesota if Washington establishes the minimum wage. Now at the state level, the legislature has established a regime to lift the minimum wage over the next several years, providing that the Democrats continue to be elected and that the whole thing is not reversed by the Republicans. So again, we need to analyze this as to how it affects the public, all of us, including the consumers, including potential workers who may lose their jobs if they can't hire that many people. So this is just, it's like a science. Economics is like a scientific law. There's nothing that Congress or the legislature can do to change scientific laws, since those laws are based on our behavior. And we all pretty much behave the same way. For instance, if we're going to buy the same product and we like to save money, we'd like to pay less. If we have more money, we'd all like to buy more expensive, high-quality things. There's nothing political about it. It's nothing the Republicans or the Tea Party or any political actor can affect. So again, at the state level, I think it's probably been a little bit too much politically driven, and I don't think it's a good thing for many areas of this state to drive that minimum wage up, even though they've tried to narrowly tailor it somewhat by requiring companies it applies to be just those that make a certain level of revenue each year. So what we're doing, we're holding down the revenue. We're actually holding down job opportunities by imposing a minimum wage that is just too strong. And it appeases unions or people who think wrongly they're going to benefit just because some individuals who've invested their own wealth or their own private property put it at risk to try to be successful in a business and plus pay taxes to support government programs and to come up with all these great jobs for us. Well, we're seeing what's happening. We're seeing that the Democrats now are trying to come up and say that the Medtronic deal, where Medtronic said, we don't want to pay these high level of taxes, we're going to move to Ireland, where the tax base is much lower, and we're going to be able to more successfully pay our taxes. And I'm not sure how that affects this surcharge on their products. I assume that they'll still have to pay this Obamacare surcharge that Al Franken put in place and Amy Klobuchar put in place through the federal government to finance this huge expense of Obamacare. And a lot of other expenses are paid as well by cutting Medicare by 1/3 to fund Obamacare, as well as, well, they imposed employer health benefits, raising the overall wage, and again, killing jobs. And all of these things are piling on companies, and Medtronic wants out. And now Obama thinks that the answer is in retroactively forcing them to stay in the country. And he paints it as a kind of economic patriotism. Well, economic patriotism would be to respect the whole public, the whole American public who are involved in our economy and involved in these economic issues, and to slow down a bit and to shift some or more of the responsibility for economic actions to free Americans. This is the land of the free. And we want to become more free economically by being in a better position. And I think the way to do this is to realize the important role that the free market economy has always played and needs to continue to play or be restored to play if we are to be successful and to realize the American dream that we want for all of us. So I believe that the minimum wage at the state level needs to be cut back, and I will support the defeat of the Democrats in order to achieve this. But I said that we all need to have our seat at the table. And so what we need to do is to go back and find out what your economic interests are and express those through your representatives and through all kinds of government activity. And we need to back away from the confrontational politics over the economy, which has resulted in some very bad economic decisions, really a terrible economy, where investors are profiting primarily because they hope that overseas companies' growth will increase, not because of our success. But what we need to do is to become successful right here in the United States, in Minnesota, each and every one of us, each and every one of our communities. And the way to do that is to go back to the basics. Like I said, we need strong families where there's a mother and father for every child, where there's a faithful family, where there's strong communities, where there's real opportunity for real education, for real jobs. So we need an economy that's going to achieve that kind of public relations, real public relations, where they have good connections with consumers, with those who want to make their products better and sell them parts or supplies, or real leadership in companies to succeed locally. That's where our goal has to be in Minnesota. Now I'm going to shift to one more economic and jobs issue here. In the past, I said I don't believe either fiscal policy or monetary policy will work to create jobs in Minnesota. These kinds of changes are too broad, and by the time we hear the economy has improved because of them, it's already happened, and it did not directly help Minnesota or substantially help us. We need to take Minnesota action, not rely on the Fed or on Congress. I have said, however, that we need to reverse the growth in federal funding by cutting departments and agencies there and bringing those responsibilities back to the state level. I just gave a great example of the benefit of working locally and handling minimum wage based on economic science and a concern for the whole Minnesota economic public. I want to call that the Move America Forward Act, and I described it in 2010 in a video that's on my website, stevecarlsonforcongress2010.com. I want to touch on one more thing, though, and you can see that this is original thinking leadership on my part. It's controversial, but I think it will substantially affect the jobs climate for the better. We don't want to follow Al Franken going after the wrong scam and actually achieving nothing more than getting the SEC to study his idea and maybe do it if they can't think of something better to do. Now, back in 1978, in a U.S. Supreme Court right here in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, a case was decided that profoundly impacted the economy and jobs across the nation. It's called Marquette National Bank of Minneapolis versus First of Omaha Service Corporation et al. And it gave Congress a job which they have not touched. That's a hot one. And it fed the housing finance crash in 2009 and the bailout. And it was all unnecessary. Look, when you go looking for a job, you need a certain wage. We're looking at political raises of the minimum wage, which are so strong that they are harmful to business. And it's because you need a certain amount of money to live, right? A living wage? But let's look behind that living wage idea. How much money do you borrow? What kind of ridiculous interest rates do you pay to banks and these big lenders? Well, if you took that interest cost out of what you need to pay just to live, or maybe for things you don't really need, but which politicians want you to buy because it increases consumer spending, which is 2/3 of the GDP. If you didn't have to pay those interest rates, including on huge expenses like cars and durable goods or housing, you'd have a lot more money now, right? And you would be able to live on a more competitive wage. Most people are taking a second job, getting their wife to work, and now we're hearing that something like 15%, I think, of young people are not having children because they can't afford it. So this actually drives abortion, the killing of innocent little fetuses, messing up relationships and all the rest. Well, what if there were a cap on the interest these lenders could charge you? You know, there used to be one. It was called usury laws. It's in the Bible. It was the principle of being fair and not being greedy and hoarding money out in New York somewhere. Well, whatever happened to those? Each state has them. In Minnesota, I think it's something like 8%. But we don't follow it. We don't follow it because of this Minneapolis case I spoke of. The case allowed companies in South Dakota, and I'm sure you've all got this mail from South Dakota-based lenders enticing you with introductory rates and all the rest. Don't take the money unless you like to live in bondage to ruthless lenders. They're driving up bankruptcies. This Minneapolis case in the Supreme Court is driving up bankruptcies, and bankruptcies are hurting a lot of businesses and people. Senator Elizabeth Warren is a professor on this stuff, consumer law, including bankruptcy law. And I can say I've actually read her book, and that's how I knew her. This case said, well, you can look right at the last line in the Supreme Court opinion. It says, quote, to the extent the enumerated federal rates of interest are greater than permissible state rates, state usury laws must, of course, give way to the federal statute, unquote. I don't want to get too technical here, but the court said, quote, Minnesota residents are obligated to pay Omaha Bank interest on the outstanding balances of their Bank Americards. Nebraska law permits Omaha Bank to charge interest on the unpaid balances of cardholder accounts at a rate of 18% per year on the first $999.99 and 12% per year on amounts of $1,000 and over. Minnesota law, however, fixes the permissible annual interest on such accounts at 12%. To compensate for the reduced interest, Minnesota law permits banks to charge annual fees of up to $15 for the privilege of using a bank credit card. The instant case began when petitioner Marquette National Bank of Minneapolis, Marquette, itself a national banking association enrolled in the Bank Americard plan, brought suit in the District Court of Hennepin County, Minnesota, to enjoin Omaha Bank and Omaha Service Corporation from soliciting in Minnesota for Omaha Bank's Bank Americard program until such time as that program complied with Minnesota law. Marquette claimed to be losing customers to Omaha Bank because, unlike the Nebraska Bank, Marquette was forced by the low rate of interest permissible under Minnesota law to charge a $10 annual fee for the use of its credit cards. And as I said, the Supreme Court vitiated or gutted this Minnesota usury law, which was 12%, in favor of an act of Congress. and by its precedent, it gutted all the usury laws in every state in the United States. If I am elected to go to Washington, I will change this congressional act to give effect to Minnesota's usury laws, and of course for all 50 states. Wall Street will howl, but Main Street will love me, including community and regional banks. I can't imagine why Mondale, Humphrey, Wellstone, or some Republican like Norm Coleman didn't do something about this, but put me on the task, send me to Washington as your U.S. Senator by voting on August 12th on the primary election ballot, and I will get this done, and I'll create millions of jobs by doing so. Now is the time to take action. Prepare to vote August 12th in the Independence Party primary to take the next step, and I will carry the ball. That's to Mike McFadden. And then I'll come back to you again and again for support to get it done. I'm Steve Carlson. I'm running for Senate in the U.S. Senate primary on August 12th with the Independence Party, and I'd like to ask you for your vote. And I thank you for watching this, and I approve this message.
Take it, Carl. Let the voters govern. Our democratic system makes you the sovereign. I'm not a Republican, not a Democrat. Don't have a safe seat, not immune from defeat. I'm running for my office and I'm not standing pat. My congressional district stuck on Democrat. I want more economic development. I'm running for the House as an independent. Let's give the people back a little liberty. Let's let them all invest in their economy. Let's give them a chance to show their industry. Our hope lies not in homosexuality. Our hope lies in real marriage and voter ID. Let's make